folks, Arizona springtime. This is chapter 17 on artists and authors at the Canyon. This is part 2 and the final part of the book. After it's finished, there is another video on my channel, which is Seldom Seen Southwest, that will have the references that I use, somewhere around 100 references, and you'll be able to access that separately. Okay, let's begin part 2. Accessing the canyon through viewing other mediums of art, such as oil and canvas, has had a longer history than photography. Traditional artists have been expressing their visits to the Grand Canyon since the 1850s. Heinrich Mulhausen was a member of Lieutenant J.C. Ives' expedition to the Grand Canyon in 1857. The expedition began its voyage up the Colorado River from Fort Yuma before Arizona was a territory. A steamship took the expedition members as far as possible until it could no longer continue upstream due to the large boulders in the river. The expedition continued overland, first to view the canyon from the rim and then to continue below the rim. Mulhausen's paintings have only recently been rediscovered. They are considered to be the first completed artworks of the canyon. Like documentary photographers, Mulhausen incorporated scale by including small human figures in the foreground. The vast distances appear squashed, similar to photographs taken with a telescopic lens. His color palette is subdued, and the landscape is stark with little detail. Mulhausen's works appear to modern viewers that he struggled with the great depth and scope of the canyon, and his details of the canyon were difficult for him to complete. For most Americans, they were introduced to the wilds of the canyon through viewing lithographs based on Mulhausen's art printed in magazines. Unfortunately, many of the lithographs took editorial control of the images and unnecessarily made the art more fanciful. One of the lithographs, as compared to the actual painting, shows fanciful details added by the lithographic artist, including the remnants of a tree in the foreground with flying vultures, skulking coyotes, and wolves running in a pack. In that lithograph, the Grand Canyon itself played a secondary role, and the shallow depth of field was maintained. The first of the great canyon painters was Thomas Moran, 1837 to 1926. He joined John Wesley Powell's expedition for the summer of 1873. Moran was already a famous artist before embarking on the expedition. The artist had submitted watercolors of Yellowstone to Congress before it became a national park. Moran's watercolors and the photographs by William Henry Jackson convinced Congress to set aside the first national park in the world. Congress even purchased Moran's massive oil painting of Yellowstone to display at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. His paintings show a canyon that is both familiar and contemporary. They are full of spectacle and drama. When Moran joined Powell, he and photographer Jack Hilliers searched for a suitable overlook for another major work that they hoped would be sold to Congress to hang near the painting of Yellowstone. The result is the Chasm of the Colorado, completed in 1873-74. The artist had chosen a spectacular view from a canyon overlook. In the very foreground, a small stream flows and mist from a waterfall billows up. It is part of a small mesa that ends abruptly at a cliff. Off to the left side, a storm engulfs parts of the canyon. Vegetation is sparse, but there is grass near the left edge, and a stunted juniper is tweaked in sunlight. In the middle ground, distant parts of the canyon are being drenched by another swirling storm. In the background, there are sunlit patches interspersed with undefined deep shadows at the horizon. Moran used great depth of field that accurately fades into a distant, subdued horizon. The painting is now part of the National Museum of American Art collection at the Smithsonian Institution. That painting alone would have sealed Thomas Moran as a great painter of the canyon, but he was enamored by the natural wonder and never stopped painting it. Engravings made from his paintings were published in popular print, and he and the canyon became synonymous. The engravings from Moran's paintings did not require exaggeration because he chose to paint from locations with maximum dramatic effect. In fact, Moran did use photographs to assist him in completing paintings after he returned to his studio back east. Except for Moran, there is a gap in canyon paintings after the Great Western expeditions ended, after the Santa Fe Railway decided to offer a passenger train to California. The Grand Canyon became available to arts once again. The train traveled across northern Arizona to its final destination. The railway supported an artist program for their advertisements. In 1892, they commissioned Moran to produce a painting that they could use in their advertisements. He produced the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. That, as a lithograph, became a popular souvenir for tourists. His painting is framed by cliffs and flattened ledges in the foreground. In the background, he used steep drop-offs and deepened shadows of the canyon to add drama, as well as a raging storm. The painting shows tremendous depth, and Moran used a wide variety of colors. For many years, Moran continued to make an annual trek to the canyon. The elderly, bearded gentleman could be seen by tourists sketching and photographing in preparation for his paintings. He was the first popular artist of the Grand Canyon. Other artists were commissioned by the Santa Fe Railway, and a few were members of the Taos School of Art. Among those artists was a founder of the school, Oscar Burninghouse. His paintings of the canyon often included groups of tourists standing near cliffs at the rim. The canyon seemed more accessible, rather than the brooding feel from Moran's paintings. During the Great Depression, the Santa Fe Railway commissioned Edith Hamlin to produce a painting for their Chicago ticket office. Her painting, titled Canyon of Flame and Storm, is brightly colored. She used stark reds in the foreground and geometric orange buttes in the background. A storm interrupts the geometric views with a palette of dark grays and blackened shadows forming eroded cliffs. Hamlin married Maynard Dixon, another famous painter. Although the couple resided in Tucson, their summer home was near the canyon. Dixon had been an accomplished commercial illustrator before he chose to devote his energies toward paintings and murals. His paintings of southwestern landscapes appear flattened. The land is abstract, cubist, and geometric. His interpretation of southwestern landscapes in the abstract is appropriate and refreshing. The natural geometric patterns of the geology of the canyon allow an artist to interpret realism in the abstract. Artists Susan Shatter and Alice Frank were artists that barely hung on to realism. Shatter painted the canyon in bold colors with a sharply contrasting palette to depict mesa tops and arroyos, each section of the canyon separated with colors. Frank painted the canyon in bright colors with Matisse appearing to be an inspiration. A contemporary master of southwestern landscapes, Ed Mell fully admits to being influenced by Maynard Dixon. Mell had begun his art life as a commercial illustrator, and not until the late 1970s did he take the leap to a full-time landscape painter. The change was prompted after a helicopter ride over the Colorado Plateau. That experience changed his perspective of southwestern landscapes. Before morphing into more abstract style, he experimented with painting landscapes in a minimalist oeuvre. He finally settled upon a similar style to Dixon. Mell's choice of colors plays an important role in his landscapes. They have limited palettes with stark differences between the geometric patterns of the sky and the flattened landscapes. The Colorado Plateau, including the Grand Canyon, has been a main theme for Mell. No matter how many times I have viewed paintings completed by Mell, his approach always looks fresh. Today, the Grand Canyon Conservancy continues the tradition of Grand Canyon art with a section on their website devoted to a group of plein air artists. Their stylistic expression of the canyon varies from Hudson River School-inspired style to contemporary abstractions. The Grand Canyon continues to inspire artists, and viewing their art will mean each viewer can experience something unique. Each viewer can access the canyon through an artist's expression. Many authors of books are masters of words, but many have a hard time expressing their experience of the canyon. Those experiences cover all the seasons, but most do not devote their writing to a single season. Many passages are not about a season. Do any authors' works solely about spring in the canyon? Yes, there is a writer who has written about spring. Anne Zwinger, in her book, Down Canyon, divided her book into sections devoted to each season. Within each season, she wrote a series of chapters. For spring, she began with a chapter devoted to the explosion of insect life along the Colorado River. She wrote intimately of midges, hornworms, and spiders, mushrooms, sage, and grasses. She effortlessly weaves her writing with details of her various expeditions to report on discoveries in specific parts of the canyon. For example, she wrote about the ancient people that lived deep in the canyon, not a chapter devoted to spring itself, rather her trip to investigate a part of the canyon during springtime. During that trip, she recounts her trip to Red Wall Cavern and the life of the antlion during spring. Her knowledge is evident and sincere, and her book can be used to further an appreciation for the canyon and the specific types of lives that make it home. I can access her trips through reading her book. She effortlessly includes the science behind a plant or animal in a familiar, easygoing context. In one chapter, she explained the plant life found at Saddle Canyon. Although that particular canyon is limited in size, the riparian ecosystem had a wide variety of life. She believed the canyon can be appreciated just for its biodiversity. The adaptability of canyon life amid the non-living canyon is remarkable, from the smallest insect to the tallest tree. By scientists and authors interested in scientific dimensions have added their own meter to the score of writers of the canyon. John Wesley Powell did not immediately write a popular account of his expeditions. That book, still published, is a monument to the early Western expeditions and the adventures those pioneers experienced. Powell reminisced about the moment his expedition began to enter the inner gorge, and he revealed the spirit of his expedition as well. Quote, "We are now ready to start on our way down the great unknown. We have an unknown distance yet to run, an unknown river to explore. What falls there are, we know not. What rocks beset the channel, we know not. What walls rise over the river, we know not." End quote. The danger he alluded to was, in reality, a humble understatement. Powell was interested in many aspects of the canyon, but he took special interest in the ancient ruins and geology. Although archaeology was still a frontier, Powell was adept at describing previously unknown ruins. Quote, "We discover yet another group of ruins. There was evidently quite the village on this rock. Again, we find mealing stones and much broken pottery. And upon a little natural shelf in the rock back of the ruins, we find a globular basket that would hold perhaps a third of a bushel. It is badly broken, and as I attempt to take it up, it falls to pieces. There are many beautiful flint chips also, as if this had been the home of an old arrow maker." End quote. While traveling through the great unknown, the one-armed explorer made many comments regarding the geology. At one spot, he observed, quote, "While the men are at work making portages, I climbed up the granite to its summit and go away back over the rust-colored sandstones and greenish-yellow shales to the foot of the marble wall. I climb so high that the men and boats are lost in the black depths below, and the dashing river is a rippling brook, and still there is more canyon above and below. All about me are interesting geologic records. The book is open, and I can read. All about me are grand views, too, for the clouds are playing again in the gorges." End quote. Powell used his diary and notes to express his fascinations, countered by realized dangers. Through his writing, I can imagine his strain of running an unknown and wild river. Many times he wrote about the dangers of overturning or being smashed on rocks as the wooden boats ran the violent rapids. He wrote in a nonchalant manner that nearly ignores the obvious danger. Quote, about 11 o'clock we hear a great roar ahead and approach it very cautiously. The sound grows louder and louder as we've run, and at last we find ourselves above a long broken fall, with ledges and pinnacles of rock obstructing the river. There is a descent of perhaps 75 or 80 feet in a third of a mile, and the rushing waters break into great waves on the box and lash themselves into a mad white foam. End quote. After determining a portage was impossible, the members continue, quote, there is no hesitation. We step into our boats, push off, and away we go. First, on smooth but swift water, then we strike a glassy wave and ride to its top, down again into the trough, up again the higher wave, and down and up the waves, and waves higher and still higher. We strike one just as it curls back, and a breaker rolls over our little boat. Still on we speed, shooting past projecting rocks, till the little boat is caught in a whirlpool and spun around several times. At last we pull out again into the stream, and now the other boats have passed us. The open compartment of the Emma Dean is filled with water, and every breaker rolls over us. We're carried into an eddy in which we struggle for a few minutes, and then out again, the breakers still rolling over us. We find the other boats have turned into an eddy at the foot of the fall and are waiting to catch us as we come, for the men have seen that our boat is swamped. They push out as we come near and pull us in against the wall. Our boat bailed, on we go again. End quote. Although I would not want to experience that level of danger, having read the account over 100 years later, I can respect Powell's tenacity and adventurous spirit. There have been many books written by geologists that explain the complexities of the canyon after Powell recorded the first observations. Their written expression of the canyon is filtered through their scientific mind. Author Halka Chronic in Roadside Geology of Arizona gave an updated analysis of the dark rocks that Powell had observed at the bottom of the canyon, the Vishnu schist. Nearly 2 billion-year-old rocks are sedimentary in nature. The rock has been through a long tortured history. They became twisted and fused far down as 12 miles under the surface. The layers above were eventually eroded away until the original, now transformed Vishnu schist layer was exposed again. Now the rock is eroding to once again become sedimentary rock. Geologist Michael Collier wrote in Introduction to Grand Canyon Geology. He recounted an important realization he made after walking along the Bright Angel Fault. During his walk, he traveled along the layer of Tapeats sandstone. It abruptly disappeared. Another layer appeared in its place. He knew that the Tapeats sandstone formation could not end without an explanation. As he studied the limestone layer elsewhere, he realized that he had found an ancient island that had been surrounded by an ancient sea. He had discovered evidence of a fossil island that was 500 million years old. Nelson H. Darton, a geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, wrote the story of the Grand Canyon of Arizona, how it was made, for the Fred Harvey Company. The company was a former vendor for the entire hotel system along the South Rim. From the El Tovar Lodge, he described what a visitor may see at that location in geologic terms. As one stands on the parapet, he is on the edge of the first big drop into the canyon over the cliffs of Kaibab limestone, forming the crest of the rim and leading to the precipice of Coconino sandstone, 700 feet below. This precipice, 300 feet high, is a marked feature all along the canyon, and both walls as a horizontal gray layer of great distinctness. Beyond this precipice are the steep slopes and numerous minor cliffs of bright red rocks which constitute many of the great ridges and promontories that jut far out into the canyon, in most cases rising into wonderful pinnacles and buttes of many forms. This is the Supai Formation, 1,100 feet thick. These red rocks are conspicuous in the Battleship, a turreted mass slightly to the left. That every place they extend down to a great wall-making ledge of limestone 500 feet thick, known as the Red Wall, because it is stained red by the wash from the red rocks above." End quote. There are other sciences at play in the canyon. Birding legend Roger Torrey Peterson wrote about his observation of birds at the canyon. In addition to finding a bird to observe, he often noted habits of those birds. At the south rim, Peterson watched large Columba pigeons that drank from a place that Peterson discovered was also frequented by deer. His keen sense of hearing discerned that the pigeons cooed more owl-like than other species. He spotted a Grace's warbler and recognized that the little bird was in its prime habitat amid a mountainous pine forest in the southwestern United States. The great birder was also a great naturalist. Peterson was interested in the ecology of places and recognized that the south rim's resident squirrel was the A-birds, while on the north rim the similar kaibab squirrel resided. He learned that at one time they were one species, but the diverging chasm of the Grand Canyon eventually separated the two populations. Student of the sciences, essayist Joseph Woodcrutch observed a small animal living in the water below the canyon's rim. He had found the American tadpole shrimp, a freshwater crustacean. In Crutch's day, the shrimp was known taxonomically as Apis aquelis. Now the shrimp is identified as Triops longicaudatus. The species was originally discovered in a small pool in the canyon in 1939. He discovered during his subsequent research on the shrimp that its lineage was 100 million years older than the ancient lineages of cockroaches. Originally, the shrimp species was one of many that were similar. Now, he advised, it was the lone species of its kind. It was all alone in its representation of life on Earth. Crutch compared the little shrimp to trilobites, an extinct species of marine arthropods, or extinct class of marine arthropods. He added thoughtfully, quote, "Both are Model Ts of animate creation," end quote. Although a witness to 3 memorable trips as springtime unfolded, the Grand Canyon transcends human experience, and we can only imagine and experience aspects of the natural wonder. I know that the full collection of all my experiences in reading, art, photography, and direct encounters with the canyon moves me forward to understand the nature of the canyon just a little at a time. Outside of the canyon, I have experienced springtime directly through a variety of landscapes. As a whole, springtime has its own complexity and its own truths. It took me much of a lifetime to gather some of the parts to try and piece together the diverse sections of the tapestry. I have learned from those experiences that springtime is only one of the paths to access the horizonless plane of nature. Along my journey, I have been enriched in so many ways that I can't wait to see what comes next. The end, and thank you for traveling with me.